Before we begin, I want to take a moment to honor the cultures behind the stories we are about to explore. The tales shared here come from many peoples, lands, and traditions. I do not change these stories to fit modern expectations or to align with today's social standards. Instead, I present them as they were told, sometimes beautiful, sometimes harsh, sometimes challenging. We are not here to judge the past, but to understand it, to listen, to learn, and to honor the ancestors who carried these stories forward. We also share stories from various religious traditions. These are presented in their historical and spiritual context, with respect for their beliefs that they represent. Every culture deserves respect, context, and acknowledgement, and this space is dedicated to doing exactly that. August 14th, The Kingdom. Story 1, Obatala and the Responsibility of Creation. In Yoruba sacred tradition, creation was not simply an act of power. It was a responsibility placed into someone's hands. Among the great Orisha, the divine powers of Yoruba religion, few embody that responsibility as profoundly as Obatala. Associated with creation, wisdom, purity, patience, and the color white, Obatala appears in important Yoruba traditions concerning the shaping of the earth and the formation of human beings. In one widely told creation tradition, the supreme divine source, Olodumare, determined that the watery world below the heavens should become inhabited land. Obatala was entrusted with the work. He descended carrying the materials necessary for creation, often described in retellings as a chain from heaven, earth or sand, a shell, and a 5-toed chicken or hen. When the earth was scattered upon the waters, the birds scratched and spread it outward. Dry land expanded beneath the heavens, and the place associated with this beginning became Ile Ife, the sacred Yoruba city, remembered as a center of creation and civilization. But Obatala's authority extended beyond preparing the land. He became especially associated with the formation of human bodies, shaping people from earthly material, while Olodumare bestowed the breath or force of life. Creation therefore placed extraordinary power in Obatala's hands. Yet, one famous tradition deliberately refuses to portray that power as flawless. While carrying out his work, Obatala drank palm wine, became intoxicated, and continued forming human bodies without realizing that some of them were taking forms different from those he normally created. When he later became sober and saw what had happened, he was overcome with remorse. Rather than denying his responsibility, Obatala vowed never again to drink palm wine and became especially associated with the protection of people with disabilities and those whose bodies differed from others. The story transforms divine authority into something far more demanding than the right to command. Obatala had been given the power to shape life, and therefore he also carried responsibility for what emerged from his hands. His mistake did not erase his sacred position, but neither did his sacred position excuse his mistake. He answered it with changed behavior and continued care. That balance helps explain why Obatala is so often associated with coolness, composure, wisdom, justice, and measured leadership. His sacred white garments and beads evoke clarity and restraint rather than uncontrollable force. In a month filled with blazing suns and roaring fires, Obatala offers another expression of power, the steady energy of someone entrusted with the kingdom and expected to govern themselves before governing anything else. Creation may begin through authority, but sustaining what has been created requires character. Obatala's story remembers a divine figure powerful enough to shape humanity, yet accountable enough to recognize that the hands given the greatest authority must also accept the greatest responsibility. Story 2, Children of Inti and the Sapa Inca. High in the Andes, where sunlight strikes snow-covered peaks and pours across valleys carved between enormous mountains, the Inca understood political authority as something connected to the sacred order of the cosmos. At the center of that order shone Inti, the sun, one of the most important divine powers of the Inca world. Inti brought warmth to the highlands, governed the agricultural cycles upon which communities depended, and illuminated an empire whose rulers claimed an extraordinary relationship with him. The emperor of the Inca state, known today by the title Sapa Inca, meaning the unique or supreme Inca was understood within imperial ideology as a descendant of the sun. That connection was carried in one of the great Inca origin traditions. According to an account recorded after the Spanish conquest, Inti looked upon humanity and sent his children, Manco Capac and Mama Ocllo, into the world to establish order and teach people how to live. Inti gave them a golden staff and instructed them to travel until they reached the place where it would sink easily into the earth. There they were to establish their home. Their journey eventually brought them to the valley of Cusco, where the golden staff disappeared into fertile ground. The sign had been given. Here, according to the tradition, Manco Capac established the beginning of the Incan rule, while he and Mama Ocllo taught the people skills associated with settled and ordered life. From this sacred beginning grew the dynasty, whose later rulers governed Tawantinsuyo, the vast Inca realm stretching across the Andes. The Sapa Inca's connection with Inti gave kingship a cosmic dimension. He was not simply a political leader who happened to worship the sun. Imperial tradition placed his lineage within the solar family itself. In Cusco, the magnificent Coricancha, often translated as a golden enclosure, became the great sanctuary associated with Inti. Spanish chroniclers described walls adorned with gold and a radiant representation of the sun, fitting for a state whose ruler claimed descent from the celestial power. Gold itself was closely associated with solar brilliance, later famously described as the sweat of the sun. The relationship between ruler and sun was also displayed publicly during Inti Raymi, the great festival of the sun celebrated around the June solstice. Ritual, feasting, offerings, political authority, agricultural renewal, and the sacred landscape converged as the ruler and the people acknowledged the force upon which life existed beneath Inti's light. His legitimacy came from belonging within an order greater than himself. In the Inca imperial vision, sovereignty therefore descended from the heavens before it radiated outward across the land. The ruler stood at the center of the kingdom, but above the ruler burned the sun from whom that kingdom claimed its sacred authority. Story 3. Devaraja and Sacred Kingship. In the kingdoms of mainland Southeast Asia, kingship was often understood as more than administration or military rule. A ruler stood at the meeting point between palace, temple, land, and cosmos. In Thailand, ideas of sacred kingship developed through centuries of interaction among Buddhist, Brahmanical, Indic, and local traditions, creating a royal culture in which authority was expressed through ritual, symbolism, moral duty, and connection to divine order. One concept often used by historians when discussing this broader world is Devaraja, a Sanskrit term meaning roughly God King or Divine King. The term is most strongly associated with Khmer political religion, but related ideas of sacred kingship traveled throughout Southeast Asia and influenced the ways rulers were imagined in neighboring courts, including those of Siam. Thai kings were not simply treated as gods in straightforward sense. Their authority was shaped through a layered political and religious vocabulary. On one level, the king could be associated with powerful Hindu deities such as Vishnu or Shiva through court ritual and symbolism. On another, Buddhist ideas emphasize the righteous ruler known as a Dhammaraja, a king whose legitimacy depended upon governing in accordance with Dhamma, a moral order taught by the Buddha. These traditions could exist side by side rather than cancel one another. Royal ceremonies drew upon Brahma priests, Buddhist monks, sacred regalia, celestial imagery, white elephants, processions, and palace architecture, designed to place the monarch within a world ordered by spiritual meaning. The royal court itself became a stage upon which cosmic order was made visible. Thrones, parasols, crowns, and elevated platforms were not merely decorations. They communicated hierarchy, responsibility, and the belief that leadership carried sacred weight. In Thai royal ideology, the king's energy was expected to radiate outward through the kingdom by preserving stability, sponsoring religious life, protecting the realm, and supporting social order. The image was less about personal glory than about the ruler functioning at a center around which many parts of society could remain aligned. In older Southeast Asian political thought, a kingdom prospered when the center was strongly and correctly ordered. Disorder at the center could ripple outward just as surely as harmony could. This is where sacred kingship becomes more than ceremony. The throne represented concentration of responsibility. The ruler was expected to embody qualities greater than private preference because the kingdom interpreted his conduct as having consequences beyond himself. Thai history changed dramatically across dynasties, capitals, wars, reforms, and religious developments. But the royal tradition continued to carry traces of these older ideas. Kingship was not simply possession of territory. It was an office surrounded by ritual because authority itself was treated as something powerful enough to require form, discipline, and sacred obligation. Story 4. Suryavarman II and Angkor Wat. In the early 12th century, Khmer king began building something so immense that centuries later its towers would become one of the most recognizable silhouettes on earth. His name was Suryavarman, ruler of the powerful Khmer Empire, and the monument he commissioned was Angkor Wat. Even the king's name carried celestial force. Derived from Sanskrit, Surya refers to the sun, while Varman means armor or protection, giving Suryavarman a name commonly understood among the lines of protected by the sun. Yet the temple he raised was not simply a monument to himself or a temple dedicated to the solar deity. Angkor Wat was originally dedicated to Vishnu, one of the principal deities of Hindu tradition, and its design transformed sacred ideas of kingship and cosmos into stone. Approaching the temple meant entering a carefully ordered sacred landscape. A vast moat surrounded the complex. Beyond it rose galleries, courtyards, stairways, and finally the 5 great central towers. These towers evoked Mount Meru, the sacred cosmic mountain understood within Hindu and Buddhist cosmology as standing at the center of the universe. The surrounding architecture represented the ordered realms around it. Suryavarman's kingdom, therefore, possessed a monumental center built as an earthly reflection of cosmic structure. Its walls carried extraordinary bas-reliefs, depicted divine and royal worlds, armies marching beneath banners, gods and demons struggling together, scenes from the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and the famous churning of the ocean of milk, in which opposing beings pulled the serpent, Vasuki, back and forth in their effort to obtain the nectar of immortality. Among these enormous sacred narratives appears Suryavarman himself. In one celebrated relief, the king sits elevated above his court while attendants and officials gather around him. His position immediately communicates hierarchy. This was kingship carved into stone, the ruler placed within an ordered universe of earthly and divine powers. Yet Angkor Wat's relationship with light makes the monument even more remarkable. Unlike most major Angkorian temples, its principal orientation is toward the west, a direction associated with Vishnu in some traditions, and also frequently discussed in connection with death and funerary symbolism. Scholars have long debated the full meaning of this unusual orientation and whether Angkor Wat may also have been intended to serve a mortuary purpose for Suryavarman. Whatever its complete original meaning, the temple's builders displayed sophisticated attention to direction, proportion, celestial cycles, and the movement of sunlight across architecture. Dawn and evening transform its towers into silhouettes in gold, while particular solar alignments have continued to draw attention to the relationship between monument and sky. Suryavarma II ruled an empire, commanded armies, commissioned temples, and placed his image among enormous sacred scenes. But his most enduring expression of authority became architecture. The king eventually died. His empire changed. Religious traditions at Angkor evolved. And Angkor Wat itself became a major Buddhist sacred site, which it remains today. Yet the kingdom he attempted to order in stone survived him. Nearly 9 centuries later, the towers still rise above the Cambodian landscape. The ruler disappeared into history. The structure built under his authority continued to hold its place beneath the sun. Daily Thread for August 14th. When we hear the word kingdom, we tend to imagine crowns, palaces, armies, and borders drawn across maps. But today's stories ask us to look beneath the symbols of authority and consider the energy required to hold something together. Obatala was entrusted with creation itself, shaping human beings and discovering that the power placed within his hands also made him responsible for what those hands produced. Among the Inca, the Sapa Inca traced his sacred authority upward toward Inti, the sun, placing the ruler at the center of an earthly empire while reminding him that even the highest throne existed within a greater cosmic order. In the sacred kingship traditions that shaped Thailand, authority gathered around the ruler through Buddhist and Brahmanical ideas of order, ritual, merit, and responsibility. The throne became more than a place of privilege. It was a center from which the condition of the kingdom could radiate outward. And at Angkor Wat, Suryavarman II transformed royal authority into architecture, creating a monumental sacred landscape whose towers still rise long after the king who commissioned them disappeared. Across these traditions, authority looks different, but each asks us to consider what happens at the center. A kingdom cannot remain ordered if its center is constantly collapsing. A ruler cannot direct everything outward while refusing to govern anything within. And although most of us will never inherit a throne, every one of us possesses a kingdom of some kind. We govern our time, we govern our attention, we decide which thoughts receive an audience and which habits were permitted to remain within the gates. We influence the atmosphere of our homes, our work, our relationships, our creative lives, and the spaces entrusted to us. Every day we distribute a limited amount of energy among them. That is where leadership begins. Leadership is energy because whatever continually receives our energy begins to grow. Feed resentment and it gains territory. Feed a craft and skill develops. Feed a relationship and intimacy can deepen. Feed a dream and eventually it begins acquiring walls, roads, names, and a life beyond imagination. Authority, then, is not simply the ability to control. It is the ability to choose what we will sustain. This is also why leadership requires boundaries. No kingdom survives with every gate permanently open. Not every demand deserves entrance. Not every crisis deserves the throne. Not every voice deserves equal authority over the direction of our lives. Sometimes governing well means deciding what belongs inside our walls and what must remain outside them. So today, ask yourself, what do I govern? Look at the places where your decisions genuinely carry weight. Your body, your words, your work, your home, your creations, your responses, your attention. You may not control everything that enters those spaces, and you certainly cannot control every person within them. But you can decide what kind of energy you bring to the center. Perhaps that is the quiet truth beneath every crown. Authority begins long before anyone else recognizes it. It begins when we stop waiting for permission to take responsibility for what is already ours to lead. You do not need a throne to have a kingdom. Look at what has been placed within your care. Decide what deserves your energy and govern it well.